Hi, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk about desirable unit differentiation in battle games. Now, I'm talking about battles, not wars. In a battle, there's no economic component. There's just a order of battle. And they usually last a few days, although in World War II you get some battles that lasted more like months, but still have battle characteristics. My notion is that you need three different tactical elements or capabilities from your units to make for an interesting battle game. Combined arms is a considerable part of that interest, and I'll talk about that later. On the other hand, grand strategy doesn't require three elements, though it may often include land and sea, and for modern era, air. Grand strategy is less about the individual units and more about the nations that are at war and the economy, and that also will be discussed later. So let's take some examples, including some of my games. Hastings 1066. On the Saxon side, you only have the housecarls and the fyrd, but for the Normans you have infantry, cavalry, and archers. A typical Napoleonic and earlier battle, infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And if we go much early, like the 17th century and earlier, we have pikemen and archers. In ancients, we have infantry, cavalry, possibly phalanxes, skirmishers, archers, and barbarians with their different capabilities. Going back to World War II, Stalingrad besieged. Infantry, tanks, and artillery. World War II in general, infantry, armored vehicles, and artillery. In some cases, there's a lot of differentiation between the categories, or within the categories. We have light and heavy cavalry, we have light and heavy infantry, we have elite standard and green infantry and cavalry as well. We have crossbowmen and self-bowmen, which is to say English archers or composite bow horse archers. And in World War II, again, we have light, medium, and heavy tanks with different missions, tank destroyers, assault guns, anti-tank artillery, anti-air artillery, howitzers, which are indirect fire, guns, which are sometimes direct fire, self-propelled guns. Perhaps one of the reasons why World War II is so much more popular in games is because there can be so much unit differentiation. What about naval battles? Well, in the 20th century, early we have torpedo boats, later torpedo boat destroyers, and of course submarines. Then there are all the gun-armed ships, which have their own differentiation, and there are aircraft. The sailing era is a little one-dimensional. You have ships of the line, you have fast scouts, frigates and smaller, you have commerce raiders, armed merchants. Ancients at sea is pretty limited. You have ramming ships and you have boarding ships. And within that you have faster ones and slower ones and so forth. World War I is a little dull because it's mainly infantry and artillery. Although early on you can include cavalry, and late on you can include tanks. And even with infantry you have machine guns and perhaps infiltrators. But in general, trench warfare isn't very interesting. In the Dark Ages, which I'll call for this purpose 500 to 900, you have infantry, usually but not always you have cavalry, and the archers are not significant. The bows were not good enough. Unless you get down to Byzantium where they had horse archers. Now what about combined arms? When units of different capabilities combine their efforts, they are stronger than the sum of their parts. For example, tanks are better when accompanied by infantry and vice versa. Artillery needs to be protected by the other types of units or it's going to fail. Air power combines with land units, sea power with air power. Combined arms is why generals and admirals want lots of unit differentiation. Insofar as war games are about generalship rather than war, and they certainly are, designers should also offer combined arms opportunities. Even in role-playing games, who wants a party without magic, stealth, and in-your-face warriors. Imagine a party where everyone is a fighter, or everyone is a wizard, or everyone is stealthy but not good fighters. It gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. It would make things very difficult. When you go to a high enough scale, wars rather than battles, the differentiation is likely to be among land, sea, and air, or it just isn't necessary, as in my game Britannia, because you have more than 2 players to provide much of the interest. Diplomacy has just 2 unit types, but it has 7 players. Risk has just 1 unit type, although I think land and sea would be more interesting, but it has several players, usually. Video games tend to have more unit types than needed because they can. Because with the computer they can program all those unit types. And because people expect complexity in a puzzle, and single-player video games are puzzles. So keep all this in mind for design purposes. The lower the scale, the more that unit differentiation will be a benefit. Thanks for listening.